Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast, and others of you are joining us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Tonight, Black Love. We, like you, are dealing with the effects of the coronavirus pandemic and are taking precautions. We are working with limited staff, and our guests are joining us remotely. Americans are awash in heart-shaped candy, flowers, and cards for this weekend's Valentine's Day holiday. But the romantic and family love represented by the annual celebration is not something that Black Americans have always felt the right to claim. Yet Black love thrived throughout the brutal and painful displacement of slavery and the oppression of segregation. These days, positive images of Black love reflected in art offer a joyful counterpoint to persistent negative portrayals of African American lives. Joining us, Dr. Tracy Parker, Associate Professor of African American Studies at UMass Amherst. Marita Rivero, President of Rivero Partners. Ms. Rivero is also the former Director of the Museum of African American History and the former VP and GM for Radio and Television at GBH. Dr. Diane Marie Stewart, Associate Professor of Religion and African American Studies at Emory University. Dr. Stewart is also the author of Black Women, Black Love, America's War on African American Marriage. And Dr. Cecil Webster Jr., an adult, adolescent, and child psychiatrist and psychotherapist. Welcome to all of you. I'm going to start with you, Cecil. Because when we say Black love, it just may pretend a kind of romantic expression, period. But you say you really can't say Black love without understanding the history of African American folks.
Yeah, it contains an awful lot. Black love has multiple meanings. Blackness has multiple meanings. We have a wide African diaspora out there. But that love can be romantic, of course. It can refer to family. It can refer to community. But really, this deep connection with one another and, a practicality, a flexibility as well in the face of that adversity. So, Black love has obviously not always been celebrated. We've had a very long history of anti-Black legislation, for example, for forbidding marriage, forbidding those connections, and separating Black people in many ways. So, yes, it's got a long, painful history in America, particularly, and it also has a wide variety of meanings, even within that Blackness, within that love.
Tracy, let's go back to the period of enslavement, because I think a lot of people might say, well, what did that have to do with the impact on Black love and Black relationships?
Yeah, so marriage in American history is about citizenship, has long been about citizenship. And so during slavery, it was about a denial of citizenship. So denying African Americans their right to marriage is, in a sense, denying them citizenship. And yet African Americans persisted and they stayed engaged. They got married and they defined marriage in ways that fit their particular circumstances. So what is really notable is that in many of their vows, what they said was, until death or distance do us part. Marriage has often bound couples not only to each other, but it also bound them to the institution of slavery. And so marriage after slavery, really, as African Americans are thinking about it, they're trying to make sure and to ensure that it is something that can liberate them.
So, Dr. Stewart, you've literally written a book on the war on marriage for Black folks. What is that war, and what's it all about? What's it focused on?
Well, it's what our guests are already talking about in some respects. Many of the conversations about low rates of marriage, particularly among Black women today, tend to focus on the personal strategies that Black women can deploy to make themselves more appealing in the dating and marriage markets. But I am interested in looking at the systemic and structural causes of what I call forbidden Black love, actually. And I believe those causes began with the slave trade. When we look at the age range of the African women who ended up on cargo ships bound for the Americas, most of them would have been married women. And so the destruction of Black relationships, Black marriages, Black families continues during slavery, even though many African Americans did marry during slavery. They certainly didn't have the legal right to marry, and their marriages were not recognized legally. And so what I do is I actually trace three major causes of forbidden Black love: racist and sexist legislation, or the racist and sexist implementation of supposedly neutral legislation. Of course, the separation of Black marriages and families, and the reproductive and sexual violence against Black women. And as a result of that, also colorism and phenotypic stratification. These are four major culprits that I believe have contributed to forbidden Black love across the centuries. And so I look at slavery, I look at Reconstruction and the Great Migration period. I look at welfare, the period when many Black women were finding themselves in need of public assistance in the late 50s and early 60s. Of course, mass incarceration from the 1980s to the present. And then I kind of look at what's happening today. Where are we today with social media?
So, Marita, one of the things that all of you agree on is that what's not well understood is that Black folks who are embracing Black love have really rejected some of the stereotypes and some of the white-centric ideals of what love is, period, and made that love for themselves. And you're quite clear that when we think about Black love, that's broader that we should think of, like the village that we're always talking about, that is our community, that we embrace so many more people in that circle of love in order for us actually to have thrived and understood the power of Black love. Would you talk about that a bit?
Yes, and I really love the kind of scholarship we're leaning on right now. Because it helps us understand how broad the community is when we think about family. Our coaches, our churches, our extended cousins, the aunties, the institutions inside our community that really helped us form the core you need to really go forward in the kind of society we have faced over these decades. And I don't think we can forget about that. It's come in the form of food sometimes, this expression of food. I can remember as a teenager being sent off to college, and I saw the look when my parents basically put me in the hands of a Black bus driver, taking me on to New York and New England. And I could tell they were passing their child on to someone they were counting on to look out for me. And he did. I felt I wasn't alone on the bus. So I think this idea that we have to embrace and understand about our community is one that's much, much more contextual and deeper in meaning than one might suppose when one just says romantic love between two people. It has to be an understanding that puts a whole community in play.
See, so let's talk a little bit more about the rejection of the white-centric ideal of the quote-unquote nuclear family. What does that look like for folks of color?
There is a wide variety of things that we can see. So I think oftentimes, yes, we have a very white heterosexual viewpoint of what relationships are, and by extension, what marriage is. But in our daily practice, we get to see all sorts of constellations of families. There might be a mom, there might be a dad, there might be a child. They might be married, they might not. There might be two moms, there might be two dads, there might be multiple children, adopted, surrogacy, all sorts of things. So we really also have to make sure that we leave a lot of room for our queer brothers and sisters as well when we think about these things. But within psychiatry, within psychoanalysis, we also have to really contend with a very white Western European point of view. There's a lot of discussion about that. There's a lot of thinking about that and trying to let a lot of that go and really getting to see the strength of the bonds that Black families often create.
And Tracy, I would say that most people, when you say love and even marriage, they don't think of Black folks as having those strong bonds. The stereotype is strong, Tracy, that is not what exists. Please speak to the fact that it very much exists, despite all of the other social ramifications that folks have to put up with.
No, certainly it has always existed. I think the problem is that in media, in Hollywood culture, on television, while we increasingly are now seeing incidents of Black love, historically we just haven't. And when we have, it's always been something that's damaged, it's pathological, it's dysfunctional. But African Americans have always believed that Black love, Black marriage, Black family was about community and was about group advancement. And this is why African Americans have stayed committed to marriage, even if it's not legalized or formalized. It's always been about the group, it's been about the community.
So I want to take a look at a clip just to underscore what we're talking about here. This is from the OWN series, which is called Black Love. And this couple, actors Tia Mowry and Corey Hardrick, share the importance of having a trusted partner.
I see Corey as my partner in crime. You know, it's like I'm not doing this alone.
Yeah. And Tia's been with me every step of the way. Like through the ups and downs, the bad, the ugly, she know ins and outs, everything. You know, she knows it all. So it's like, I'd rather share that with somebody, you know, for the rest of my life than someone who don't know you. And then when everything, just say if everything was great, you don't know if it's genuine. You don't know. You don't know if it's real. You know, at least I know Tia got my back, you know, to the grave. So I know she's with me and she knows I'm with her. And that's just, you know, everything's not perfect. You know, marriage is work.
So, Diane, you know, that's a scene that a lot of us relate to and many people know. By the way, this is a married Black couple doing this series, which I think is in this 4th season on OWN. And it's, you know, many portrayals of all kinds of couples, I mean, all kinds across the spectrum, really talking about making their love work as Black people. But I think about some of the more intensive rendering apart, the factors that rendered apart couples and continue to do so. And I'm thinking about mass incarceration, which I know is something that you've looked at. So talk about what that impact is and has been, not only on a particular couple, but really on a community of Black folks wrestling with trying to maintain a strong love foundation.
Indeed. I really like this conversation because it's complex and it is featuring the fact that Black love has been resilient across the centuries. And so I appreciate that clip very much. And we know that romantic love, when it's strong, when it doesn't give way to toxicity, it bleeds into other forms of love. I mean, that's how you know that love has been tested and that love works. So yes, but we are contending with institutional forces and systems that have rendered Black couples apart. And so we know that mass incarceration has placed millions of Black men in prison. I mean, some demographers say that for every 100 Black women available, there are 87 Black men. Some say 93. We know Black men have been undercounted in the decennial census for decades for so many reasons. Their need to strategically disappear and not be counted, especially as it relates to welfare policies. So in terms of the sheer numbers, we have that problem. But in terms of the damage that it does to a community that is already struggling with 10 generations of stolen wealth, mass incarceration costs. It costs the relatives, the wives, the partners, the parents of those that are imprisoned, because in many respects, they have to either pay for expensive collect telephone calls. I mean, some legislation is seeking to overturn those policies of the past, but this has been wreaking havoc on our community for decades. Or they have to order food and special toiletries or what have you for their loved ones from commissaries, which are incredibly pricey. They cannot bring food when they go to visit their loved ones that they could cook at home. There are so many costs. There have been housing policies that don't allow convicted felons to live in public housing after they have been released from prison. And of course, we know the discrimination that many formerly incarcerated Black men have faced in seeking jobs after incarceration. We know that certain laws during the Clinton era as well prevented Black men in prison from being able to pursue education, from receiving Pell Grants to continue a college education or begin one.
So the loss reverberates. It's huge, and it's reverberating beyond any individual incarcerated person.
Absolutely.
So that brings me to you, Cecil, to talk about mental health and health around this, because can the absence of Black love, however we've described it here, really impact physical health?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Right. We have a community that has really surrounded itself in this idea of love as being really protective and dynamic and able to deal with a world that is quite hostile toward it. And yet, much to Dr. Stewart's point, in many ways, this has been quite successful as a sort of a general Black community. We do face a lot of stereotypes, for example, with the mention of, for example, when I think about Black fathers, for example, and I think about the kids that I see, oftentimes people really focus on the majority of Black children not being born to families that are married. But 60% of Black men live with their children, and it really requires a nuanced view in that sense. And also, there was a 2018 study that showed that, whether or not Black fathers were living at home with their children, they were most likely to be involved with their lives, like eating meals with them, bathing them, diapering them, playing with them. And so this is the area that has been really resilient with many of the kids that I've seen, the parents that I see, the people that I see, as well as a really important area of vulnerability. When one's father is being taken away, like let's say incarcerated, or not able to live at home with the family, that can have some tremendous impacts, because kids often they notice a lot and can create many different narratives about why that might be the case, and often blame themselves. And for the strain between couples, for example, that also might come at great personal cost. We often push ourselves very hard and do what we have to do in the face of adversity, but that comes at great personal cost as well.
So I know we've been talking about all of these really harmful factors and the struggle, but Marita, I also want to raise up that in this moment, which I'm thrilled about, there's a lot of art that's out there celebrating actually the resilience, as Diane said earlier, of Black love. And I am, I tend to be a pessimist, but I love the movie, The Photograph, the latest Sylvie's Love, Cherish the Day. There are many others I can name, but we're so unused to seeing those joyful representations of the resilience of Black love. But talk to me about how important that is for our community to see that and embrace it.
I think any community plays off its mirror image, right? We absorb what's told about us, how we see ourselves reflected. And all of a sudden, the older movies, Love Jones, remember Love and Basketball, some of the old love favorites are being updated in these days. I'd even say Bridgerton, The Duke. All of a sudden, we're seeing images of ourselves and a side of ourselves we well know in film, in media. We hear it. It's in our music. There have been crooners. There have been wonderful jazz renditions of romantic pieces. So romance has always been a big part of our lives. Somehow we're stuck feeling that the kind of the pathology of society has been draped on our shoulders, and we're only supposed to be presented as dealing with those sorts of issues without regard to how they got there. We can go back to that point sometime later. But in addition to what society has been trained to see, which is this kind of negative picture, inside our own lives, we've enjoyed love of our children. We've enjoyed laughter. We have finally begun to see again these images represented in radio, in television, in newspapers, through scholarship, as represented on this panel. And you can't have enough of that. I mean, otherwise there's a tear that's caught inside you, I think, for a lifetime because you're unable really to deal with a society that expects you to feel. My son said a young black man, or black men period, are only allowed to be emotional when they win the game. You win the football game, you hit the basket, everybody can hug, you can cry after the game you won. Otherwise, you're not allowed to cry. I think allowing for the fact that we have full lives, we're 360-degree people, and we are able, in that context, to experience anything any human being experiences. And it's time that part of ourselves were available to us and to anyone else looking at us.
And we should note you're a one-woman romantic because you make your own Valentine's cards and distribute them. So you're Black love walking, I guess.
Oh, wow. I do. I've always loved Valentine's Day. And I've always thought that if women, whoever it was who turned Valentine's Day into an obligation, shame on you. Shame on you. You know, I have to have this, I have to have that. Get over yourself. What you do in Valentine's Day is you're really just celebrating the connection you have with people who care about you, however they want to express it and however you want to express it. So, yeah, I like to make Valentine's.
That's great. Now, Tracy, let's talk about this current generation and how the impact of our history and how we are rejecting the white-centric ideal of Black love and trying to embrace what is culturally always been there for us, which is the village, and also our romantic partners. But the young people, you say, are putting this off. Is that because of what they have seen from past decades and generations in our history? What do you say about how Black young people are embracing Black love?
You know, among my students, they really want Black love, right? It's something they yearn for. They understand the need for intimacy, for connection, and yet they also are very well aware of patriarchy and gender inequality. And so they don't want to enter into relationships or partnerships in which that could be amplified. They're very concerned about not being treated as an equal partner or male dominance. But they also are very concerned about getting through school, right? Getting through not only undergraduate school, but graduate school. And so as a result, many of them, and including my peers, are delaying marriage in order to get themselves centered, set, well prepared for a future.
Is it your sense, however, that it is something they feel the right to claim? As I said earlier, sometimes Black folks didn't feel the right to claim Black love.
Absolutely. I think they feel the right to claim it. They also feel the right to define it as they see fit, right? So that might mean that they do get married. It might mean that they never get married, but they cohabitate for decades on end, and they have children out of wedlock. They also understand that with marriage comes state surveillance, and historically has come with state surveillance, which means, you know, which often invites the white gaze, white surveillance into your home and your personal life. And so I think they're really trying to figure out ways in which they can negotiate all of this in order to find happiness and peace, and but also attend to this notion of group advancement.
So, Dr. Cecil, talk to us about jumping the broom and to bring these cultural traditions into the Black love space so that other people can see how our individual and unique expression of it.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about how we can bring that tradition in, as well as creating new traditions as well. You know, full disclosure, I got married. I also jumped the broom. It was a really important day for me as well, much to the delight and joy of my family. They were very excited about that. But it was a really important part of this ceremony, like to bring in elements of like historical connection to America, Black Americans enslaved here. And just to feel like a sort of greater sense of connection in that way. There were many people there that were asking, like, okay, well, like, what's that about? Why you jump something? Like, what was that about? And, you know, oftentimes it would make people uncomfortable to have to sort of focus on a really painful aspect of marriage, that, you know, that it wasn't recognized and that slaves had to do this thing that they had access to in order to signify their commitment to one another. And at the same time, it really led to some really beautiful conversations with one another. In addition to that, I think this generation particularly is the most poised to be adaptable and expansive in how they think of Black love. And much to Marito Rivera's point about art, and it's sort of a reflection of a myriad of different aspects of Blackness, I think a big part of that has been expanded around sort of queer identities as well. We've often thought of Blackness through a very white lens as well, again, heterosexual. But we can think about all sorts of things, like even gender roles that people have. There's a lot more flexibility within Black communities within that way. We can think about, same gender marriages or connections or partnerships as well. And I think younger people are much more adept at being able to explore those sorts of things, even if it means not fully realizing a very strict tradition as well.
All right. Well, that's probably a good place to leave it right now. Jumping the broom is a joyful thing to see. People haven't seen it. They lay the broom down and the couple jumps over into the land of happiness, as they say. So anyway, that's the end of our broadcast and the end of our show. I want to thank all of my guests and thank you for joining us. Stay with us as we continue our conversation on Facebook and Twitter.